Assassins, to another episode of the Dark Assassins podcast, the show that dives deep into not just technology, but the concepts, software, and procedures behind it all, and explains it so simply that even your grandma can understand it. As always, I'm your host, the Dark Assassin. So for all of you software developers out there, and maybe just the general populace in general, I hope you enjoyed your snow day on Monday. Of course, Monday in this case being October 20th. And if you're confused about what I'm talking about and you're thinking it did not snow here on October 20th, I'm talking about a different kind of snow day, as we will get into later this episode. But needless to say, Amazon Web Services, which runs the vast majority of the internet, was having a bit of a moment on Monday. So we're going to kind of talk about what exactly happened and why so many services were affected, and some kind of, I guess, lessons learned about how this can apply to you and what you should kind of take away from it. So that's coming up in this week's episode. But before we get into that, let's start with our trivia question for the week. So, in the spirit of Amazon Web Services, aka AWS, when was AWS officially launched to the public? And I'll give you bonus points if you can get the month and or the day as well. So, when was Amazon Web Services officially launched to the public? And that is your trivia question for the week. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about the Apple news that happened last week. That, of course, being Apple announcing the M5 chip and it coming in the Vision Pro, MacBook Pro, and iPad Pro. And I think for the Vision Pro, I'm not entirely sure the chip upgrade alone is really going to sell people. Like, it's the same form factor. I think it actually got a little bit heavier, and it's still, as far as I know, the same price. So I'm not exactly sure who the market's for if you didn't feel the need to buy the first one. I'm not entirely sure if that just upgrading the chip is like, ooh, yes, now I will buy it. Because granted, when the Vision Pro originally came out with the M2 chip, the M3 chip basically came out like almost right after it, so it was kind of a little old at that point. But I mean, now it's getting the M5 chip, which is the hot new kid on the block. But I mean, at the same time, like I said, they didn't change the form factor. It got heavier, and I don't know. I feel like if you weren't really sold on the original, you're probably not really going to be sold on the new one. But I guess we'll see. But as far as the chip is concerned, the M5 chip, I think just overall it is a pretty solid upgrade based on some of the reviews and whatnot that I've seen on it. It seems like it's about 20%, has a 20% improvement in the CPU and a 40% improvement on the GPU, at least year over year compared to the M4 chip. And it seems like depending on the use cases, it's like competing pretty heavily with some of the previous year's Pro chips and even some of the Max chips as well. I think at this point it's basically entirely beating all the M1 chips, Ultra included. M2, I think the M2 Ultra still wins in a handful of categories, but again, the M2 Ultra is an absolute monster. And then as far as the M3 goes, I think it's kind of sort of toe-to-toe with most of like the M3. I think it beats the M3 Pro in most things, and it's kind of toe-to-toe on the Max. And then for the most part, the M4 Pro still beats it, but there are a few cases where it gets pretty darn close. So it's definitely a very solid year-over-year upgrade, it looks like. And it kind of makes sense because Apple, how they were marketing the M5 chip, this is, I think, one of the probably not the first time they've marketed it at people who already own Apple Silicon, but they're really starting to kind of hone in on, hey, if you have, an M1 series chip, look how much better this is. It's a pretty good upgrade. Which, I mean, I guess it makes sense. Apple Silicon's been out for over 5 years now. So I mean, some people are maybe starting to thinking about upgrades at that point. I think generally when it comes to like not necessarily phones is a little bit different, but when it comes to like computer technology, generally people are kind of looking at a 5 to 7 year refresh window typically. Of course there are outliers, of course. You have the people that upgrade to the latest and greatest every single year, it doesn't matter what it is. And then you have the people that literally will use their computer until it is no longer functional, or it's just no longer supported by software updates, whatever the case. But typically between that like 5 to 7 range is kind of the sweet spot, and now we're kind of starting to creep into that. So Apple also starting to cater to those Apple Silicon users, which it also makes sense because there really aren't many Intel systems supported anymore. So kind of the idea is, hey, most people probably aren't on Intel anyway. I mean, there's of course going to be some stragglers, but most people are probably running Apple Silicon at this point. So we kind of have to start marketing it to them as well. And but the other thing with the M5 chip is I touched on some of the performance numbers. I think it's even more true now than ever that you probably don't need anything more than the base chip. And now, in fairness, this kind of was true back when the M1 came out. Like, there were comparisons between the M1 and like the maxed out, like fastest Intel MacBook Pro you could get, and the M1 basically destroyed it in almost every category. So it's only gotten better and better over time. Like it's getting to the point where like the base chip of the new generation basically destroys like the Pro and Max chip from like the not necessarily the previous generation but the one before it. So if you're one of those people that's on the fence of I'm not sure, do I need to go to like the Pro chip or am I good with the base? You're good with the base. And it's kind of like I said, it's kind of been that way since the inception, but it gets truer and truer every year, and this is just kind of another example of that. The only kind of, I guess, recommendation I would have of if you need more power is one, uh, do you have money burning a hole in your pocket? Two, is there a specific use case that you have where you would need the extra power that would come from a Pro chip or come from a Max chip or come from an Ultra chip? And if so, does that use case that you have in mind, this potential savings that you would incur in time, justify the price increase that you'll be paying for those higher end chips? Now, maybe of course that answer is yes. You of course know your situations better than I do, but I think it's one of those things where if you have to ask, you probably don't need it. It's like in the enterprise world where if you have to ask the price of something, you can't afford it. If you have to ask, do I need the higher tier chip? The answer is probably no, you do not. And we have a good example of this coming up in the nerdy things segment, where I basically did the exact same thing. But yeah, so that was kind of the some of the highlights from the M5 chip. I know it happened a week ago, but I still wanted to talk about it. So with that, let's get into this week's cybersecurity tip. So this week's cybersecurity tip kind of stems from another nerdy thing that we'll talk about this week, which is do not allow passwords for SSH authentication, and you should only be using authorized keys. And well, I say this is kind of leads into some of the nerdy things because just using passwords is a fantastic way to get yourself hacked, which is obviously something that you don't want to have happen to you. Because if you allow password authentication, an attacker can basically just brute force their way to try to figure out, what your password is. Now, there are, of course, mitigations to that. After like a few attempts, it'll kind of like stop you from allowing you to enter passwords and whatnot. But if you use keys only, if you try anything other than a key, it will just instantly reject you, number one. And number two, if you don't have an authorized key, it will also reject you. And of course, the authorized key file is stored locally on the system. So if an authorized key is not in that list, it will not be authenticated. So it's a much more secure way of doing SSH access. Now, sure, it's not bulletproof. You could have your private key somehow get leaked, or someone, or maybe, oh, I don't know, maybe someone hacks into one of your systems with a password, then does some lateral movement onto a box that's only allows key access, and then installs their own key onto there. Couldn't be me. So there are definitely it's not, a silver bullet, right? Like we say everything in cybersecurity, there is no silver bullet, otherwise everyone would be using it. But it's a much stronger way of doing SSH access is via SSH keys. So if you have any SSH servers lying around, especially ones that are publicly exposed to the internet, I highly, highly, highly recommend you disable the password authentication and do an SSH key one. Now, with that said, one of the potential concerns for that is getting locked out of the account, which technically is a valid concern. But depending on how you have your system configured, there's usually some other form of backdoor that you can get into it. For instance, if you have it as a virtual machine running on a hypervisor, you could go into the hypervisor and access it through the console and just get local access that way, and you can get into it and then fix whatever keys that you need. If it's running on a cloud provider, the cloud, that's basically the same thing as a hypervisor, so you could log in through the console and do it that way. If it's a physical machine, that's where things get a little bit more complicated. Of course, if you have physical access to it, you can just plug a monitor, keyboard, and mouse into it, and you have access. But if it's, say, maybe it's your remote backup system that you have at someone else's house and you can't necessarily get to it, that's where things can potentially get a little more tricky. But you also can make some workarounds for that. Like, one potential solution that you could opt for is you could have some sort of script set up with some sort of repository somewhere that has a list of your keys that you authorize for your servers, or maybe just that server in particular, that you can access, wherever you are, that server will pull from on some kind of cron job or something, and then you can update it that way, so then it can pull down the latest config, and then it'll then have your key, and then you could log into it that way. Not I mean, dependent You have to be careful with that, though, because depending on where you have that repository located, you definitely want to make sure you have that secured and only you can, make edits to it, because of course you don't want, someone on GitHub pushing a commit to add their own keys. That of course would not be very good. But at any rate, I mean, theoretically they would have to submit like some kind of a pull request or something. But just to keep in mind that it is possible that you could have your keys that you authorize your servers to access. You could do it a server by server basis, which theoretically would be better for security reasons, least privilege and all. But have some kind of repository set up, that you have your servers on some kind of script, on some kind of cadence, some kind of schedule, basically pull down the latest version of the config and install it locally. That way you don't necessarily have to worry about your keys accidentally getting nuked, because how could that ever possibly happen? So that is your cybersecurity tip for the week. So moving right along, let's get into what nerdy stuff have I been up to this week. So I mentioned in last episode about the Apple event how I was very, very tempted to get the AirPods Pro, the new AirPods Pro 3. And I did end up buying them. And I have to say, they are pretty dang good. Now, I'm going to talk about some of the features that I really like, which, to be fair, some of these might not actually be exclusive to the AirPods 3, but coming from the original AirPods Pro, they're new to me. So first off, the skipping forward and backwards for audio tracks is fantastic. Also with the volume adjust, that is kind of like a godsend, because before, when I had my AirPods Pro in, if I wanted to change the volume or skip forward or skip back, I'd have to pull out my phone and manually do it on there, which granted wasn't like super annoying, wasn't a major hassle, but it's very nice that I can literally just reach up to the AirPod Pro and just, do whatever controls I need to do, which is, I really enjoy that feature. Definitely a quality of life improvement for sure. Another feature that's really cool is the auto volume adjust that it has. So like, and I didn't notice it at first, but depending on what your environment is like, it will increase or decrease the volume in order to like provide like the same level of noise cancellation, which is super cool. One of the great examples I have of it is like when I'm, vacuuming the house or running the lawnmower or something. Like I can significantly notice a difference when I turn the vacuum off or turn the lawnmower off, and then the volume kind of goes down a little bit, and then I start it back up and then the volume gets louder again. Another one was like I was at the gym and I was standing under, one of the big, huge ceiling fans, and like I guess it detected like the extra wind noise or whatever and like increased the volume, which was pretty cool to provide, some better noise canceling. And on the topic of noise canceling, the ANC, or the active noise canceling, is definitely an improvement, at least specifically in some situations. Like I talked about the lawnmower. Like when I've been mowing the lawn recently with the new AirPods Pro 3, I honestly sometimes I forget that it's even running. Like the only way I can tell that it's running is, I when I'm like mowing the lawn, like I can see, grass clippings and stuff, but like I really can't hear it, which is definitely pretty incredible. Because with the old AirPods Pro I had, the original ones, like it definitely reduced the sound of the lawnmower, but you could still hear it. Now, sure, I guess I could have like really cranked the volume up, but I didn't opt to do that. So, but at basically like the same volume level as what I had my old AirPods Pro at, the noise canceling is definitely an improvement. The other thing that's also an improvement is like on airplanes and stuff. I did take a flight with the new AirPods Pro 3 and really couldn't hear the airplane at all. Like it was very nice. I was just able to listen to my movie or my music and wouldn't have even known that I was in an airplane, because there was none of that like airplane background white noise that you get when you're on a plane. Now, it's still not perfect. Like when I run the vacuum and stuff, like I can still hear it with the vacuum. And then of course your kind of one-off sounds, like if you clap your hands together or you smack something or like hit a switch or something, and those kind of like one-off peak sounds, it's not gonna, fully cancel those out. But I mean, I don't think really any noise canceling product on the market can even do that. So, I mean, I guess you get what you get, but still definitely a significant improvement. As far as the audio quality goes, I think it's better. But it definitely wasn't nearly as a noticeable of a difference as I was kind of expecting or hoping for. But that also might just be because I was so focused on all the other things that I liked, that I wasn't really focusing on the audio quality. The other thing that is also kind of a cool feature, but also a little annoying too, is if you have active noise canceling on and you start talking or someone around you starts talking, it'll kind of like fade out or like lower the volume of whatever you're listening to, if not outright pause it. And also like kind of fade in transparency mode, which is pretty cool. I think this was on the second gen AirPods Pro too. But I could be mistaken. But anyway, it is a pretty cool feature, but it's also kind of annoying too, because sometimes like if you're, listening to like a podcast or something and you kind of make a audible remark to yourself, it will like pause it and like turn on the transparency mode and then like kind of wait a few seconds and then it'll go back and resuming, which is a little bit annoying. But generally I think it is a cool feature, especially if you're kind of, doing whatever you're doing and someone tries to talk to you. You don't have, I mean, I'm the kind of person that takes an AirPod out anyway because I think it's kind of the respectful thing to do. I don't necessarily understand the people that keep their headphones or AirPods in all the time, even when they're talking to others. Maybe that's just a me thing, but regardless, I usually always just take an AirPod out anyway, just to kind of show that like I'm actually listening to you and not just, tuning you out, doing the sure, yeah, cool story. But the other, I guess the last thing I wanted to touch on is the battery life is pretty incredible. Now, granted, my AirPods Pro, the original ones, they probably had some battery degradation since I had them for so long. But just in general, like the battery life is fantastic. Like I was talking about the plane that the flight I had previously, the AirPods Pro, like there were instances where they would die before I landed or before I was ready to take them out, like, getting off the plane and whatnot. But the AirPods Pro 3, I pretty sure by the time I landed and like took them out and everything, they still had like I want to say it was like 60% battery life left, which was pretty incredible. Granted, I think probably had them in for like 3.5 hours or so, something like that. So, pretty solid. Definitely a strong improvement in battery life. Um, so definitely good to see there. The next thing I wanted to talk about was going back to the M5 chip. No, I did not get an M5 MacBook Pro, but I did get an M4 MacBook Air. And this is kind of the case in point that you don't need any more than the base chip because I mean, I got the base M4 chip in the MacBook Air, and it's honestly been pretty bulletproof. It's been fantastic the past like little while that I've had it. Because the thing of it is, I don't need the power, right? The point of this computer was to replace my 2017 13-inch Intel MacBook Pro, which was definitely starting to show its age. I mean, one of the main reasons it was showing its age was, well, it hasn't been supported since Ventura. Ventura was the last OS that officially supported it, and I didn't feel like installing OpenCore on there. Partly because, at least originally, there were some issues with the T1 chip, I think, with OpenCore, so I just kind of never went to OpenCore. But I probably could have put OpenCore on there, but I just decided not to. So I've been just kind of chilling with Ventura, which has been fine. I haven't really had an issue with that. The main issue I've had with it is it definitely has started to chug. And it's very noticeable when it's on battery. And even if I don't have low power mode on, it always seems to do everything significantly slower when it's on battery. And that might be due to some kind of like battery degradation throttling that Apple's doing behind the scenes. Not entirely sure because when it is plugged in, it's a little bit faster. I mean, it still chugs, but it's a little bit faster. But I'm not entirely sure it's a full on like throttling issue because I really haven't had an issue with the battery life because I talked about the flight I went on. And at that point, I hadn't gotten the MacBook Air yet, and I still had the MacBook Pro. And I mean, I watched a movie and was basically using the computer for the majority of the flight, and I still had like half battery remaining. So I mean, that's like 3 hours or so with only getting down to half battery. Now, granted, I was just like watching a movie, which is like kind of the least battery intensive thing you can do. But even like standard usage that I was doing with it, like I battery wasn't a huge issue. Now, could it have been better? Absolutely, and the MacBook Air has been phenomenal with that. But it wasn't like a huge pain point. It was mainly just kind of the chug factor and the fact that it wasn't officially supported anymore that finally pushed me over the edge and decided to upgrade because yeah, the dual core i7 was definitely starting to show its age. But another reason I don't really care about the power is I have an M4 Pro Mac Mini that is all the power that I need and then some. So if I ever really, really need to do something power intensive, like, work on a coding project or something, which granted the MacBook Air could absolutely do as well. I have a battle station set up with my Mac Mini that I can just plug into and, go from there. I don't necessarily need the MacBook Air to be anything else. Plus, the main reason I got it was I liked the form factor, the thinness of it, that was kind of like a high priority for me. And of course, the thing I dislike the most is the notch. I don't understand why Apple put the notch there. The notch is literally the size of Texas, and all it has is just a dinky little camera in the middle, which, as far as the camera is concerned, the center stage camera is kind of wild. It's kind of taken some getting used to how it just kind of like follows you around. A little weird, but I mean, I guess it's kind of cool. But yeah, the fact that, it's this camera and then this cutout the size of Texas just absolutely makes no sense to me. I never understood why Apple decided to go that route. So anyway, I installed like the top. I think it's called. Is it called Top Notch? I don't remember. But basically a hide your notch something. I don't know. It's basically a tool that allows you to hide the notch and basically just makes the taskbar at the top just go all black, so the notch just blends in with the taskbar. And I of course always make sure to have that turned on because quite honestly, the notch is an eyesore. But that's my really only main complaint with it. I guess the fact that there's only ports on the one side is also kind of a bummer. But I mean, I guess it kind of is what it is. I don't necessarily see Apple changing that anytime soon, at least until they do a refresh. And even if when they do a refresh, I'm not sure if they're gonna put ports on the other side because even going back to the M1 MacBook Air, that only had ports on the one side, and their lowest, I guess, spec computer, even back to the original MacBook, I guess with the butterfly keyboard MacBook, that one also only had the one port on the one side, and even the MacBook Pros, like the lower spec ones, when it still had the touch bar, that also only had the ports on the one side. So I mean, I don't necessarily see that going away. I mean, it'd be kind of cool if they did put at least, a USB-C port on the other side so you could charge it on either side of the laptop, but I mean, I guess it is what it is. But yeah, overall, I've been definitely enjoying it. It's been pretty good. So yeah. The other, I guess, nerdy thing that I had, we have a lot of nerdy stuff, I know, is we once again have another instance where my monitoring system alerted me that my ISP was down, and when the ISP came back up, before my ISP did. So this is the second instance of it happening. During this week, I was trying to watch something on my TV, and the internet wasn't working. And then I got an alert on my phone saying that my home lab is inaccessible. And I was like, that's pretty cool. And then a few minutes later, I get a text notification from my ISP saying that there is a network outage in my area and I am affected. I was like, very cool. I already knew that. And then I think it was about like an hour later, I didn't get a notification when I was supposed to saying my home lab was inaccessible. So I checked, and sure enough, I had internet again. And then maybe about like 10-15 minutes later, my ISP sends me another text message saying that the internet has been restored. So thanks again, ISP, but I have my own tooling that is generally better than your tooling. So, but I appreciate the effort anyway. And then we get into some other infrastructure related things. So my SSL certificates for my home lab were basically all expiring, so I kind of went through and redid all those. Pretty easy. I have like a wiki, and my home lab wiki basically has how-tos for all of them that I need to update. So it was super, super simple having to update them. It was maybe like a 5-10 minute job. At some point, I probably should just like write an Ansible playbook or something to do it, but because I have to do it so infrequently, it's not very high on the priority list, but probably something I should do. And then the other infrastructure related thing was the Wi-Fi at my house has been absolutely abysmal. I bought myself a like modem Wi-Fi router combo thing, so I didn't have to rent one from my ISP, and it's been great aside from the Wi-Fi. But that probably also has to do with the fact that it's like up in the corner bedroom. so it has trouble reaching like the rest of the house. So anyway, I finally broke down and bought a PoE access point, kind of mounted it directly in the middle of the house, and then ran some custom Ethernet cable. So I made my own cable for it, and it was pretty cool. Ran the cable to the switch, plugged everything in, turned on the PoE, and bada bing, bada boom, Wi-Fi has been rock solid ever since. So I have been very, very happy and pleased with that. And the last thing I want to touch on was the inspiration for the cybersecurity tip this week, because I hacked myself. And the reason, well, first off, the reason I had to hack myself was because I got my new MacBook Air. So the short version of this is I have a script that will basically install my SSH keys onto all of my servers, right? So I have an Ansible playbook that will deploy that all for me. And when I got my new MacBook Air, of course, I had to generate new SSH keys, and I ran the script to add my SSH keys to all of my servers, and everything was fantastic. And then so I guess a little bit of background. How this works is it first copies all the SSH keys to my Ansible users on my various servers that I use to access Ansible with. And then I have other standard users that I use when I actually want to log into the system to, do whatever I need to do. So this basically how the script works is it takes the authorized keys for the Ansible user and then copies them to the other user. The problem was there was a specific instance where there was a mismatch in SSH keys. So I basically ended up nuking my access that my phone has into my jump box that I use to basically manage my home lab when I'm either away or I don't feel like logging into something from like my laptop or something. I'll just log into the jump box and do things. So for instance, basically that jump box is my Ansible home. Like everything Ansible related is fully configured on there, so it just makes it easier just to log into that box and do whatever Ansible things I need to do. So I tried to do that with my phone and it was not working. At first, I just kind of thought, okay, maybe the server's down or something. No, it was up, but I was getting an SSH key denial error, and I was like, that's weird. And then I was like, oh, I probably nuked the key when I ran my script to copy the SSH keys. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. So I was away from home at the time and I was impatient. So I wanted to get this working now. So I was like, okay, well, I can't get into any of the boxes that I can't get into this box, and I want to update my servers. So what can I do? Well, I happen to know of a particular computer in my home lab that has access to this jump box via SSH key, but is password protected via SSH and not SSH key protected. So I go and log into that box with the password, and then I do some lateral movement, jumping to the jump box, and I manually install my SSH key for my phone, log out of everything, and then back on my phone, try to SSH back into the jump box, and wouldn't you know it, it worked. So I basically hacked myself by exploiting a vulnerability that was a server with password authentication, used that exploit, did some lateral movement to move to the box that I wanted to, manually installed my key, and now I have access to that machine. Technically unauthorized access because it was the SSH key wasn't in there before I manually put it in there. So yes, I hacked myself. So yes, it was definitely a fun exercise. But this is kind of one of the other things that you have to know when it comes to hacking is the majority of hacking is very boring. Um, a lot of hacking is either like social engineering attacks or something like this. It's not like furious clacking away on a keyboard like Hollywood would potentially lead you to believe. It's kind of boring like this, where you find a vulnerability, you log into a server with, poor security on it, and then you use that server to jump around and laterally move around the network. So, and that's basically what I did. So yeah, that was the inspiration this week's cybersecurity tip. But I guess on the flip side, if I did follow my own advice, I would have been fully locked out of the jump box, at least from my phone, and then I would have had to like go home and then do just from from my laptop or something, do it that way rather than being away from home and being able to exploit everything. But it is what it is. Sometimes you have to make mistakes to learn from them. But yeah, so that is how I hacked myself this week. So now let's get into the fun and excitement that happened this week in the corporate world, that being the recent AWS issue. Now, I will have all the links down in the show notes for this. I will have both the kind of play by play, if you will, that happened as AWS was posting updates on the situation, as well as their full report that they published after the fact, which is kind of where all this comes from. So, as we touched on at the top of the episode, and as I'm sure most of you are probably aware, on Monday, October 20th, Amazon Web Services was having a moment. Now, spoiler alert, Jeff Geerling was spot on with his t-shirt that he has that says it was DNS, because it was in fact DNS. DNS was the culprit. So as a quick recap, if DNS is either a foreign concept to you or you don't remember what it is, DNS stands for the Domain Name System, and it's the service that allows you to type Amazon.com, Apple.com, Wikipedia.org, etc. into your web browser, and your browser/computer knows where to go on the internet to find that website. But it's not just for websites too, it's for other services that exist on the web as well. Basically, everything in AWS's backend, as we'll kind of see, uses DNS in order to figure out where to go. So as we'll see, the issue with DynamoDB is a DNS entry for Dynamo kind of got nuked. So things didn't know how to get to Dynamo, which was causing all kinds of issues. So yeah, if you didn't have DNS, you basically would have to memorize a ton of IP addresses, which nobody has time for and nobody can theoretically or realistically do. So DNS is a very crucial component of the internet, and when it goes down, basically everybody feels it. So the particular instance where this issue occurred was in the US East 1 region, aka Northern Virginia, which is also kind of known as the internet capital of the world. At least at one point, I think over 50% of like the world's internet traffic flows through Northern Virginia. Not sure if that statistic is still accurate, but if you've ever been to Northern Virginia, at least in the past few years, you'll very well know that there is literally data centers everywhere. And I mean that literally everywhere. So, yes, there's a lot of internet traffic that flows through there, and that is like the primary region for AWS. Now, the issue, as I kind of touched on, was a DNS record for DynamoDB in that region got wiped. And as a result of that, it kind of had a cascading effect that took down not only other AWS services like Lambda, ECS, Redshift, etc., but it also took down actual other people. Like it took down, people like Snapchat, Apple Music, Hulu, Spotify, Zoom, and others all basically got taken out because AWS was having issues. And that's, kind of what happens when you run all your services in the cloud. If the cloud provider goes down, you go down with them. You're on the ship, you go down with the ship. Now, that was just the first incident. There was a second incident that happened later on, which kind of sort of was a effect of the DNS issue, but also a little bit different. So the second one was EC2, which is basically AWS's virtual machine solution, and it was unable to launch instances, which at the beginning of the this debacle, it wasn't necessarily a huge issue for people because instances that were already running were fine. So if your EC2 instance was already running, you didn't notice any issues. But if you tried to launch a new one, then that's where you would have issues. And the reason why this was why EC2 was having issues was because one of the underlying systems of EC2 depends on DynamoDB, which of course was down because of the DNS issue. So as a result, it was unable to launch new instances. Now, the reason, like I said, it wasn't noticed immediately was because already running instances weren't affected. But once Dynamo came back online, the underlying EC2 system was able to start, reassigning leases and stuff for EC2 instances, like where they should be distributed and whatnot. And because there were so many instances of EC2, and there were so many requests, the subsystem started to fail because it couldn't handle the influx of requests. So that's where EC2 started having issues. So basically, what the engineers at AWS had to do was they had to start implementing throttling for this system in order to not overwhelm it and allow, things to slowly start to rebuild and kind of clear out the queue before slowly ramping things back up. And there was also an influx of network changes as well going on all at the same time as part of the subsystem, which also caused network connectivity issues for new instances as well. So that was kind of all of the excitement. All of that came from kind of AWS's after action report that I have linked in the description. So if you want even more clarity or dive deeper into stuff, I will have that linked below. Now, there were also reports during this outage that people's quote unquote smart appliances were also not working and were down as a result of AWS being down. Things like locks and other things like that. Which, in my opinion, if your smart device can't function without being connected to the internet, it doesn't seem very smart to me, but that's just maybe my cold or hot take or however you want to deal with it. Now, one of the things I found most hilarious amongst these smart devices was things like smart beds, so types of beds that allow you to regulate the temperature, the elevation, and other things like that. Some of the beds were not working either. So which caused some people to be either stuck upright or overheating, which the greatest comment I think I saw in regards to this was laughs in poor. And there was another one I saw related about the whole like outage of AWS. So of course you have that one with because you're too poor to afford one of these fancy dancy smart beds that can like do all this stuff, so when they're down they cause issues. But the other one was you're so poor that when AWS goes down you can still get into your house. Which I think that one is probably also equally hilarious. But this kind of goes back to why us technology folks don't like smart devices and try to avoid them like the plague, because we know how this stuff works. We know if AWS goes down and our locks might not work on our house, which is definitely a concern. I mean, the one with the smart bed, that one, I think that one's just kind of funny, more than anything. But I mean, the fact that there are smart devices that literally rely so much on the cloud and the internet that if it goes down, they basically can no longer function. To me, that's not very smart. If you're a smart device, you should have enough on-device capabilities that you can still function even if the internet isn't working. Now, I understand that, some IoT devices like that, Internet of Things devices like smart cameras, doorbells, and so forth, they don't exactly have the compute capacity on board to perform all of the actions that they were marketed to perform. But they should at least have enough capability to be able to function offline if needed. And this is another reason why I will never have any smart home devices of any kind with the caveat being the only way, and I mean the only way, that I would ever consider having any sort of smart device. I mean, privacy concerns aside, because smart devices that send basically everything to the cloud is a privacy nightmare in and of itself, and I won't have it. But the fact that an internet outage can basically completely disable them and make them absolutely useless is also a concern, too. And the only way that I would ever consider having a smart home device is if one, all of the traffic from these devices never escaped my internal network, i.e., never went out to the internet, or or I guess not or, and um, I could fully control everything internally from my home network. So something like Home Assistant or something like that. Now, granted, I have never used Home Assistant, so I can't independently vouch for it, but others in the open source community basically swear by it. So I guess I'll take them at their word, I guess, but I can't independently verify it. But I would use some sort of open source solution like that to basically self-host my own like smart home infrastructure if I ever decided to do that, which I don't really have any incentives to do that. Um, but this whole outage thing kind of got me thinking about which angle I should take on this, because there's a lot of angles that you could take on this, because but at the same time we do have to acknowledge the fact that it's not realistic or practical for non big tech companies to basically manage their own data centers across the globe for redundancy and latency reasons. Now, even like big names, right? Like we mentioned some big names that were affected by this. Apple Music was having issues, Zoom was having issues, Snapchat was having issues. I mean, a lot of big companies were having issues with this because AWS was down. Now, while all of us home labbers are laughing hysterically because we didn't have any kind of downtime because we host everything ourselves, that's not realistic for corporations, because your home lab might have some pretty good uptime, but I doubt it has 99.99% or whatever AWS promises uptime. Because if your internet goes down, well, I mean, maybe that's not an issue for you because everything's just internal and that's no big deal, which I mean is the case for me. But if you host anything that's publicly accessible, that's definitely a concern. Another concern is if you have a power outage at your house, well, now all of your services are down. You have basically no redundancy unless you have home labs in multiple locations. Latency is also an issue. One of the reasons why there's data centers literally all over the world is so the data that you're trying to access is as close to you as possible, amongst other reasons. But you also have that redundancy factor as well, because if everything was hosted in Northern Virginia, even if it was in multiple data centers, people on the other side of the globe, it would be slower for them to access resources than if it was in a data center more close to them. So that is another reason why companies like to distribute their services across data centers all over the world to be as close to their users as possible. So it's very unrealistic to expect companies to basically flip the bill of managing data centers across the globe just for their company alone, because we're talking billions with a B dollars, like if not, tens of billions of dollars, literally just to that, and that's just to build the data centers, not even mentioning the cost for running the servers, buying the servers, employing staff to, be at the data centers in case something goes wrong. I mean, there is a lot of cost associated with running your own server. So you can't really expect, these tech companies or just general companies in general to not go with a cloud provider, as much as us home labbers would like to say, oh, just self-host everything yourself. Because I mean, I like self-hosting things myself, but if I were to be running a business, I wouldn't necessarily want to run a business out of my home lab. I guess I'll just say that. I would probably opt to go with some kind of cloud provider. And even still, I think most home labbers at least have some sort of cloud component to their home lab. I know at least for me, I have a VPS, a virtual private server in the cloud, that I do for one, a VPN, but also for different monitoring things for my home lab, because I have like my entire notification system set up in the cloud, because if my home lab actually goes down, then my notification system goes down, and at that point it's basically useless. So like for instance, the internet outage that I had this past week. If my internet went out, my notification system, if it was hosted in my home lab, couldn't notify me that it was down, because it couldn't, send the notification through the internet. So I understand that there is a need for cloud providers. So I decided to take a different angle and thought about the whole self hosting of your own media angle, because some of the services that went down due to the outage were things like Apple Music. I think Spotify might have also been affected, and Hulu, and a bunch of other different services. And this kind of goes back to the whole subscription model, right? If you're paying for a subscription to whether it's a music streaming service or a service like Netflix, Hulu, or any of those other streaming services, you don't actually own anything. You don't own any of the content. It's like leasing a car. You don't own the car. The car is not yours. Now, I guess the difference there is, at the end of the day, you theoretically could choose to buy the car once the lease expires, but you can't buy the content from the media provider and the streaming provider. And even in cases where you can buy the content, like we saw with Crunchyroll, I think it was like a year ago, they could just pull it anyway, and whoops, so much for your purchase. You no longer have access to it. So this is where the internet pirates of the world would say, if buying isn't owning, then piracy isn't stealing. Now, of course, I'm not condoning piracy by any means, but suffice it to say, if you're paying for a streaming service, a thing like AWS being down or other cloud providers being down and you unable to access your media could potentially be an issue for you, and you might not be having a very fun time and be kind of mad that you can't access your content. But if you own your content, you have physical copies or even digital copies that you have at your house somewhere, or on your phone or on your laptop or whatever, if the internet decides that it wants to go down, it doesn't matter, because you already have those copies of the things you want to watch or listen to, that you don't need to worry about the streaming service. Now, I also have to have some self awareness here and acknowledge the fact that it also is not practical, whether from a cost perspective or potentially even a storage perspective, for you to purchase literally every song you enjoy, every movie you like, and every TV show you like in their completeness, because that would get very expensive very quickly, not only from, the cost of actually procuring the media, but also procuring the storage required to have host that media yourself. Now, the storage one is a little less of an issue, because large hard drives are pretty cheap these days. But I mean, if you want some kind of a backup solution, then you basically have to double the cost of storage potentially, or if you're using a cloud provider. But suffice it to say, it is very potentially cost prohibitive to procure and buy all of your own media and have local copies of everything. But that's not to say that you should just be like, oh, it's too expensive, so I'm not going to bother doing it. One of the best ways to build up your media collection is to procure things as they come out, right? So if there's a new album that dropped from your favorite artist and you decide to buy and download it, that's a lot better of a solution than waiting, say, like a few years and being like, oh, there's all this music I like and I'm gonna go get it, because that is a lot of work and probably a lot of money too. So it's best if you kind of do it as like you identify something you like and kind of getting it then. But also, you don't have to get everything, right? Like, because we're talking about, potentially the cost, both in terms of storage size, and actual physical dollar cost. Um, prioritizing the things that you really like the most. So your top favorite movies, or maybe your top favorite TV shows that you love watching and you couldn't live without. Those would be kind of the things that you'd want to prioritize when kind of building up your media collection. Because the thing of it is if you self-host your own like media streaming service like Jellyfin or something, it doesn't matter if the internet's down. As long as you have electricity at your house, you can stream your content as long as you're connected to your house. So, like, even if the streaming services are all down because AWS is down, if you even if you're away from home, as long as you have a VPN connection into your house, well, guess what? You can stream all the shows and movies that you want because you have them all locally. And that's kind of the thing that I kind of wanted to drive home here is if you locally host things, whether that's your own internal services or your own media, these kinds of widespread internet outages really don't affect you as much because a lot of the things that you would be looking to do if the internet was down, whether you're at work and you can't do anything, or you're stuck waiting somewhere in a waiting room and you can't do anything, a lot of people will opt to listen to music or watch a TV show or a movie or something. But if you can't physically access it because of an internet issue, well, what are you going to do? But if you have everything locally, then that's not really an issue. And there have actually been times where my internet's been down before and I really didn't even notice notice it was down or it was an issue because all of the things I needed I had locally. Like even before, like back when I was living at my old place, one time the internet went down. I don't know, it was down for a few hours, I think. And I just, went up to my office and just kind of started hacking away on some code, just did some coding and didn't even need the internet because all the resources I need, I had, in my home lab. I had, the source code that I was able to reference. I had, my computer there. It didn't need to access the internet. And to be honest, I really didn't even notice that the internet was down because, I had everything I needed right there. But if I needed the internet to access those things, then yeah, that would have been a bit of an issue. So yeah, I'm not also, to be clear, I'm not saying that you should like straight up cancel all of your streaming services or anything like that. Because that's not necessarily the necessarily a smart thing to do, per se either. But the the media that you enjoy the most on those streaming platforms, maybe consider having buying and procuring a local copy. So if that streaming service goes down or they just decide to remove it one day, you don't have to worry about not having access to that anymore. And I think probably music might be kind of the bigger one here, just because now, I think I'm not entirely sure how Apple Music and Spotify works as far as like the local download, since I know you can download songs locally. I don't use either of them obviously, so this might just be very dumb and ignorant of me. But even if you have it downloaded locally, I mean the main appeal to that is you don't have to worry about like the data costs of streaming the song to your local device. It's all locally, so it can just play it locally. But I kind of also have to imagine that there has to be some kind of handshake going on to validate that your subscription's actually valid. And I'm not sure what kind of cadence it does that. So, like, I guess what I'm trying to say is just because if you download it locally, is it still able to authenticate the fact that you're a paying subscriber and it will play the music for you? Or if the internet's down and it can't do that check, if it kind of has issues. I'm inclined to believe that it will still work and it probably refreshes. It's probably like a credentials thing, like it'll refresh your credentials on some sort of cadence or something, or maybe it saves like when your account will quote unquote expire for time somewhere locally. That would kind of be my guess. So I would like to think if you downloaded your songs from Spotify or Apple Music locally, if one of those services went down, you could still listen to your music. I would like to think that. But the nice thing is if you actually got your music yourself and manually put it on your phone, you don't have to worry about that in any rate, because it's always there. It's always accessible whenever you want to listen to it. You don't have to worry about data costs. You don't have to worry about the potential of the internet being down. None of that. So I think that was kind of the direction I wanted to take. Like I said, there were numerous directions that we could have taken with this, but I think this was kind of a clear indicator that because this wasn't even an issue with, like, Hulu or Apple Music or anything. It was an issue with the platform that they host their stuff on. So it's not necessarily like the streaming service that you subscribe to is down or having issues. It could be another dependency that they rely on is having issues, and then you can't access your stuff. So yeah, having physical access to your stuff, owning actual copies of it is definitely a way to prevent and help lessen the effect of when the internet goes down, like it did on Monday. So yeah, that was the outage. And to wrap up this week's episode, let's get back to our trivia question for the week. So this week's trivia question is, when was Amazon Web Services officially launched to the public? If you said March 14th of 2006, congratulations, you got this week's trivia question correct. Pi Day, no less. I think that's kind of fitting, seeing that it's a technology thing being launched on Pi Day. That seems kind of fitting. So if you enjoyed this episode, definitely be sure to leave it a rating and review, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And definitely be sure to share it around with a friend or family member, especially if they're still wondering why the internet wasn't working on Monday. And if you have any questions or ideas or topics for future episodes, you can shoot me an email at contact@darkassassinsinc.com, or if you're on YouTube, you can just leave a comment down below. And that's going to do it for me in this episode of the Dark Assassins podcast. Until next time, my fellow assassins, remember, bull nothing equals true. If action not equal to null, return true. I'll see you next time on the Dark Assassins podcast.